My name is Claire Whitfield, and I'm 32 years old. I live in Manchester, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought I had my life figured out. I worked as a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm. I drove a car I couldn't quite afford. And I believed, truly believed, that the way you dressed and spoke told the world everything it needed to know about your worth. That morning, I stopped at Bellamy's Cafe on my way to a client meeting. It was my favorite spot. Overpriced lattes, soft jazz, the kind of place where everyone looked like they mattered. I was standing in line, scrolling through emails when I noticed him. A man near the door, torn jacket, worn-out boots, a face that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. He was sitting quietly at the corner table, nursing a cup of water, not bothering anyone. But something about him being there in my cafe irritated me. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough for the barista to hear. "Is he even a paying customer? This isn't a shelter." The man looked up. His eyes were calm, almost amused, which annoyed me even more. "I was just leaving," he said quietly, and started to gather himself. But I wasn't done. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the stress of the client meeting. Maybe it was just who I'd become. "People like you make places like this uncomfortable for the rest of us," I said. "Maybe find somewhere else to sit around all day." A few customers glanced up. Someone murmured something. The barista's face went tight with discomfort. Nobody said a word to stop me. The man simply nodded, picked up his tattered bag, and walked out into the rain without looking back. I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I got my coffee, sat by the window, and forgot about him within the hour. I didn't think about that morning again, not until 3 days later, when my manager called me into her office with a look on her face I'd never seen before. "Claire," she said carefully, "corporate just informed us. Bellamy's Cafe in this entire building has been sold. New ownership takes over next week." "Okay," I said, confused. "What does that have to do with me?" She slid a folder across the desk. On top was a photograph. It was him, the man from the cafe, except now he was wearing a tailored suit, standing in front of our building, shaking hands with the city mayor. "He's the new owner," my manager said, "of everything. The cafe, this office tower, all of it." My stomach dropped. His name, printed beneath the photo, was one I would never forget. His name was Julian Marsh. I stared at that photograph for what felt like a full minute, my mind refusing to connect the dots. The trembling hands, the torn jacket, the quiet man I had humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. And now this, a tailored navy suit, a confident stance, the mayor's hand in his, cameras flashing. "There has to be some mistake," I whispered. My manager, Denise, shook her head slowly. "No mistake. He's the founder of Marsh Holdings. They quietly bought this entire block 8 months ago. Nobody knew because he never makes public appearances. Apparently he prefers to observe things himself first. Observe things himself." The words hit me like a slap. He hadn't been homeless. He had been watching, testing, and I had failed spectacularly. On record, in front of witnesses. In the very cafe he now owned. "Claire, there's more," Denise continued, her voice tightening. "He's requested a meeting with every senior staff member in this building tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Attendance is mandatory." I felt the blood drain from my face. Did he say anything about me specifically?" Denise hesitated, which told me everything. "He mentioned the cafe. He mentioned an employee who worked in this building. He didn't say a name yet. Yet. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the scene over and over, my voice, sharp and cruel, echoing through Bellamy's. "People like you make places like this uncomfortable." I had said that to a man worth more money than I could comprehend, a man who now controlled my paycheck, my office, my entire career. I thought about calling in sick. I thought about quitting before he could fire me himself. But some foolish, desperate part of me still hoped that maybe, he hadn't recognized me as clearly as I feared. Maybe he wouldn't remember my face among the blur of customers that morning. I arrived at the building at 8:15 a.m. wearing my sharpest blazer, rehearsing an apology I wasn't even sure I meant. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor, a floor I'd never been allowed to visit before. Glass walls, a boardroom table longer than my entire flat, and at the head of it, sitting with the same calm, unreadable expression he'd worn at the café, was Julian Marsh. He looked directly at me the moment I stepped in. "Ah," he said softly, gesturing to the empty seat directly across from him. "Miss Whitfield, please sit. I've been waiting to speak with you specifically." Every eye in that room turned to me. The room went completely silent. 20-odd senior staff members, all staring at me like I'd already been sentenced. I sat down slowly, my legs barely cooperating, and folded my hands to hide their shaking. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. 3 days ago, he began, addressing the room but never taking his eyes off me. I sat in a cafe on the ground floor of this building. I wasn't dressed the way I am now. I wanted to see something, how people in this company treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. Character isn't shown in boardrooms. It's shown in small moments, when someone thinks no one important is watching. My throat tightened. "Most people ignored me," he continued. "A few looked uncomfortable and looked away. One woman offered me her own sandwich without being asked." He paused. "And one employee decided I was an embarrassment to her morning coffee run." A few heads turned toward me. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. "Miss Whitfield," he said finally, "would you like to tell everyone what you said to me that morning?" My voice cracked. "I didn't know who you were." "That's precisely the point," he said, calm as ever. "You didn't need to know. Basic decency doesn't require a title or a bank balance to earn it." I opened my mouth to apologize, but he raised a hand. "I'm not interested in apologies made out of fear of losing a job," he said. "I've built my entire company on one principle. I don't work with people who only show kindness when it's convenient or profitable." My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. This was it. He was going to fire me. Right here, in front of everyone I worked with. "Effective immediately," he continued. "There will be restructuring in this building, new leadership, new priorities, and a full review of every senior staff member's conduct, past and present." He finally looked away from me toward Denise. "Miss Whitfield's position will be reevaluated separately. I'd like to speak with her privately after this meeting." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, discussing changes I barely absorbed. All I could think about was that word, privately. Was he going to humiliate me the way I had humiliated him? Fire me quietly so there'd be no witnesses to my tears? When the room finally emptied, it was just the two of us. The city skyline stretched out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. "Sit back down, Miss Whitfield," he said. "There's something about that morning you don't know yet." I sat back down, my hands still trembling in my lap. Julian walked to the window, his back to me, silent for a moment before he spoke. "You know why I do this?" he asked. "Why I dress in rags and sit in cafes pretending to be invisible?" I shook my head, unable to find my voice. 12 years ago, I was actually homeless," he said quietly. "Not for a morning, for 11 months. I lost my job, then my flat, then everything else in a slow, humiliating collapse. I sat outside cafes just like Bellamy's, watching people who once called themselves my friends walk past me without a flicker of recognition. I felt something twist in my stomach, shame, mixed with something else I couldn't name. One woman stopped," he continued. "She didn't know me from before. She just saw a man who looked hungry, and she bought me a meal and sat with me for 20 minutes. She talked to me like I was still a person. That single conversation changed the direction of my life. She helped me get an interview at a small logistics company. I worked my way up from there. Eventually, I built all of this." He turned to face me. "So now, whenever I open a new location, buy a new building, I test it myself first. I need to know the culture of the people I'm about to be responsible for. It's not about revenge, Miss Whitfield. It's about knowing who I'm really working with." "Then why single me out?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why not just quietly let me go? He studied me for a long moment. Because I looked into your file this morning. Your performance reviews are excellent. Your team respects your work. Whatever cruelty you showed me at that café, it doesn't match everything else I've read about you. I didn't know what to say. Some part of me had already accepted losing everything. I'm going to give you a choice, he said. Option 1, I let this go quietly, you keep your position, and we never speak of that morning again. I almost sighed in relief until he continued. Option 2, you spend the next 30 days working directly under me on a project involving the very issue you displayed that morning. If you refuse both, you're free to resign with a full reference. I stared at him, stunned. Why would you offer me that? His expression shifted. Something unreadable passed behind his eyes. Because tomorrow, he said slowly, you're going to meet someone else from that cafe. Someone whose story is far more connected to you than you realize. I barely slept that night, turning his words over and over in my mind. Someone whose story is far more connected to you than you realize. I ran through every face from my past, every person I might have wronged, but nothing clicked. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was overthinking it until I walked into the small conference room Julian had directed me to and saw her sitting there. My breath caught in my throat. Rosa? She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that hadn't existed 6 years ago. But it was unmistakably her, Rosa Delgado, my college roommate, the one I'd stopped speaking to after a stupid fight over unpaid rent, the one whose calls I'd ignored for months until she simply stopped calling altogether. Hello, Claire, she said, her voice flat, guarded. Julian stood near the window, watching the two of us like he already knew exactly how this would unfold. Rosa works in our community outreach division, he said. She runs the program that connects Marsh Holdings with local shelters and food banks. I hired her 8 months ago. I looked between them, confusion knotting in my chest. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? Rosa finally met my eyes. Do you remember why we stopped talking, Claire? My face went hot. The rent thing. I know I handled it badly. It wasn't just the rent, she cut in, her voice sharper now. After we stopped talking, my mother got sick. I dropped out to take care of her. I lost the apartment. I spent 4 months living out of my car before I found a shelter that helped me get back on my feet. She paused. The same week I moved into that shelter, you posted photos from your promotion party. Champagne, new apartment, everything perfect. I saw it. I remember thinking, she doesn't even know what happened to me. She never even asked. The room felt like it was closing in around me. I had no memory of that timeline. I'd been so wrapped up in my own life, my own climb, that I never once wondered what had happened to the girl I used to call my best friend. I didn't know, I said weakly. Rosa, I swear I had no idea. That's exactly the problem, Julian said quietly, stepping forward. You never asked. He looked at me with something between disappointment and expectation. Tomorrow, he said, you'll be joining Rosa's team for the next 30 days. You'll see exactly what people go through when the world stops asking questions. He paused. But there's one more thing you should know before you agree to this. He slid a folder across the table toward me. Rosa isn't the only person from your past connected to this project. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside was a single photograph, slightly worn at the edges, clipped to a printed case file. It was my brother. Daniel? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Julian nodded slowly. Your brother has been part of our outreach program for the last 4 months. I hadn't seen Daniel in almost 3 years. We drifted apart after our father's funeral. Both of us too proud, too hurt, too stubborn to make the first call. I always told myself he was fine, successful even. Last I'd heard he was working some corporate job in London. That's not possible, I said. Daniel has a good job. He's doing fine. Rose's expression softened, though there was no pity in it. He lost that job 18 months ago, Claire. Company restructuring. He didn't tell anyone in the family because he was ashamed. He couch surfed for a while, then ended up in one of our partner shelters in Salford. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My own brother, struggling alone, and I hadn't known because I hadn't asked. I'd been too consumed with my career, my apartment, my carefully curated life, to notice that the people who once mattered most to me had quietly slipped away into hardship while I wasn't looking. Why didn't he reach out to me? I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer. Julian had answered instead, because the last conversation you two had, according to his file, ended with you telling him he needed to figure out his life before showing up at family gatherings again. The words hit like a physical blow. I remembered that conversation. I remembered being irritated, embarrassed by his uncertainty, his lack of direction after Dad passed. I had said those words without a second thought, then moved on with my life as if nothing happened. Is he here? I asked, my voice cracking. Not yet, Julian said. He doesn't know you're involved in this program. And I want to be clear, Miss Whitfield, this isn't a trap designed to humiliate you further. What happens next is entirely your choice. What do you mean? You can walk away right now, he said. Resign, take your reference, and never think about any of this again. No one will judge you for it. Or... He paused, letting the silence stretch. You can spend the next 30 days working to rebuild what your pride has quietly destroyed, starting with the people sitting in this room and ending with your brother, who has no idea the very company that saved him from the street is about to be run, in part, by his own sister. I looked at Rosa, then at the photograph of Daniel in my hands. There's just one condition, Julian added, his tone suddenly grave. If you choose this path, there's something about your brother's file you need to see first, something none of us expected to find. Julian slid a second document from beneath a folder, placing it gently in front of me. My eyes scanned the page and my heart stopped. It was a medical intake form. Daniel's name, his date of birth, and beneath it, a diagnosis I never knew existed. Early-stage kidney failure, discovered during a routine shelter health screening 6 months ago. He's sick? My voice came out as barely a breath. He's stable for now, Rosa said gently, but he needs a transplant within the next year. He's been on a waiting list, keeping it from everyone, including your mother. He didn't want anyone to feel obligated to help him. I pressed a hand over my mouth, tears finally breaking free after days of holding them back. My brother had been suffering, silently, terrified, alone, and I had been too busy nursing my own bruised ego over a stupid argument to even check if he was alive. Why are you telling me this? I asked Julian, my voice shaking. Why involve me at all? You could have just let me quietly resign. Julian's expression softened for the first time since I'd met him. Because 11 months of my own life taught me something, Miss Whitfield. Cruelty isn't always evil. Sometimes it's just blindness. People walking past each other, too consumed by their own struggles, or their own pride to see what's right in front of them. He paused. I don't believe you're a cruel person. I believe you're someone who forgot how to look. Rosa reached across the table and, hesitantly, placed her hand over mine. I was angry at you for a long time, Claire. But watching you right now, I don't think punishing you helps anyone. Least of all Daniel. I wiped my face, steadying my breathing. What do I need to do? Starting tomorrow, Julian said. You'll work with Rosa's team, full-time, for 30 days. You'll help expand this outreach program into 2 additional shelters. And when you're ready, you'll go see your brother, not as his sister trying to fix things overnight, but as someone showing up, consistently, the way you should have all along. And after the 30 days, after that, he said, the faintest smile touching his lips, we'll talk about your future at this company, assuming you still want one. I nodded, unable to speak, and stood to leave. But as I reached the door, Julian's voice stopped me one final time. There's one more thing, Miss Whitfield. He held my gaze steadily. Tomorrow, when you see your brother for the first time in 3 years, he won't be the only person waiting for you at that shelter. Someone else has been asking about you for a very long time. someone none of us realized was connected to this story until this morning. I arrived at the shelter in Salford the next morning, my heart pounding harder than it ever had before a client pitch or a board meeting. Rosa led me through a modest hallway, lined with donated coats and shelves of canned food, toward a small common room at the back. Daniel was sitting by the window, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw me. "Claire?" "I'm so sorry," I said, crossing the room before he could even stand, wrapping my arms around him. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for any of it." He held on to me tightly, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything else. 3 years of silence dissolved into that one embrace. "There's someone else here," Rosa said softly, gesturing toward the doorway. "Someone who's been asking about you." I turned, and my breath caught in my throat. "Mom?" My mother stood there, older, thinner, wearing a volunteer badge pinned to a plain gray cardigan. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years, not since our own falling out after Dad's funeral, when grief had turned into blame, and blame had turned into silence. "I've been volunteering here for months," she said, her voice trembling. "Daniel didn't want me to tell you. He said you had enough going on." She stepped closer. "I didn't know how to reach you either, love. I didn't know how to fix what I broke between us." I looked between my mother and my brother, then at Rosa, and finally at Julian, who stood quietly near the entrance, having followed a few steps behind. He wasn't smiling, but there was something deeply satisfied in the way he watched the 3 of us reunite. "You planned this?" I said to him, my voice thick with emotion. "I only opened the door," Julian said. "You're the one who walked through it." Over the following weeks, everything changed. Daniel received his transplant match through the outreach program's medical partnership, a gift I would spend the rest of my life being grateful for. My mother and I slowly rebuilt what years of pride had torn down. And I stayed at Marsh Holdings, not in my old marketing role, but leading the very outreach division that had once exposed every ugly truth about who I'd become. 6 months later, I stood outside Bellamy's café, staring through the same window where I'd once humiliated a stranger without a second thought. Julian joined me, 2 coffees in hand, offering me one. "Funny," he said, "how a single morning can either destroy a life or completely rebuild it." I thought about Rosa, about Daniel, about my mother's trembling hands the day we found each other again. "I used to think success was measured by what I owned," I said quietly. "Now I know it's measured by who I show up for." Julian smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him. "Welcome to the company, Miss Whitfield," he said. "Now go build something worth being proud of."